He's great. He is great, and he's our best. They say he's the closest thing to General George Patton that we have, and it's about time. It's about time.
Donald Trump loves nicknames. He tends to use meek names to diminish his enemies and rewards the people he likes with muscular nicknames like Mad Dog. It's been reported Trump loved the nickname Mad Dog the first time he heard it. It's been theorized it played a part in the selection of General James Mattis to be defense secretary. But exclusive reporting out today from NBC News finds that these days the man known as Secretary Mattis is often out of the loop when it comes to key policy decisions. He was apparently blindsided by Trump's decision to pause those military exercises with South Korea after that meeting with Kim Jong-un. Mattis was said to be surprised at Trump's announcement to form a new branch of the U.S. military, the Space Force. Current and former administration officials tell NBC News, quote, the president has cooled on Mattis in part because he's come to believe his defense secretary looks down on him and slow walks his policy directives. Well, here with us to talk about it tonight, Carol Lee, our NBC News national political reporter, whose byline appears on this NBC News report, and retired U.S. Army Colonel Jack Jacobs, a decorated veteran of combat in Vietnam, one of 72 living recipients of the Medal of Honor, also happens to be, for good reason, our MSNBC military analyst. Welcome to you both. Carol, how did we get here vis-a-vis the president and his defense secretary?
Well, I think there's a number of ways in which we got to this point. When Secretary Mattis came in, he was part of this group of generals that was, supposed to kind of in terms of if you talk to people on Capitol Hill or others who felt like they were, a stabilizing force on the president and that they were going to keep him from doing and taking steps that could plunge the country into some sort of chaos or might take U.S. foreign policy in a direction that they felt like it shouldn't go. And so he was, it was Secretary Mattis, it was then former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and then John Kelly, who's now the Chief of Staff. And so the three of them kind of worked in tandem together and would pushed the president to go in directions that they wanted his policies to go, particularly on Iran, for instance, on the nuclear deal. And the president, over time, got frustrated with that. We saw Rex Tillerson eventually be fired. We've seen John Kelly lose some of his clout and his power. And the president, meanwhile, towards the end of last year, became more emboldened and more inclined to listen to his own instincts and want to take big strides on the world stage. And so he was less inclined to listen to somebody like James Mattis and more inclined to turn to some of the new folks coming into his administration, like his national security advisor, John Bolton, or when Mike Pompeo moved over to become Secretary of State. And so all of those factors kind of played a role in what's now, according to our reporting, a dynamic where the president doesn't really take Mattis's advice. They don't really agree on very many policy issues. And even more so, he doesn't notify him in some instances that he's going to take certain significant foreign policy or national security steps.
Jack, knowing a little something about guys like you and Secretary Mattis, I'll lump in our mutual friend Barry McCaffrey. You're patriots, driven by duty. You've all been shot at for your country. You all believe in chain of command. Having said all that, it is hard to envision a Secretary Mattis saying, that's it, I'm out of here, you'll have to find somebody else.
Yeah, I think he's going to stay in his post until he's dragged off. But it raises an interesting question of why he stays there, other than the fact that he will stand on his post until he's relieved. Reminds me of a conversation I had with a very good friend of mine who rose to the top ranks in the military establishment some years ago. And he was involved in executing our plan to go into Iraq, which was very poorly managed, certainly at the time we took over Baghdad and so on. Didn't work out very well indeed. Yeah. And you could argue strenuously it was a rotten idea to start with. All that notwithstanding, I asked him how come he didn't put his foot down and keep us from doing the kinds of things that we shouldn't have been doing. And he said, because if I did that, I'd be fired. And I said, what's wrong with that? He said, I'm more effective inside than outside. And I told him, I said, if you're ineffective inside, you might as well be outside. James Mattis is ineffective inside, and over time is going to become more ineffective, and it's just a matter of time, I think, before he leaves. It won't be by his own volition, like John Kelly, for example. It'll be because he's shipped out.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.